Sophie Cunningham's cuddle demand to Caitlin Clark fuels Fever reunion buzz. Say what? Yeah.
Say what? Yeah. Sophie Cunningham just posted a throwback video with Caitlin Clark, and Clark's 3-word response has the entire WNBA talking. Sophie replied with a playful demand about cuddling and dinner. But behind the jokes is a serious business decision the Fever front office needs to make. And with expansion drafts coming and free agency frozen,
many Indiana Fever fans want nothing more than for their team to bring Sophie Cunningham back in free agency this winter, whenever the WNBA league office and its players agree to a new CBA. Of course, Cunningham isn't the only member of the Indiana 2025 team that fans are clamoring to bring back, as Kelsey Mitchell is just as beloved among the fan base. But while Mitchell might make more of an impact on the court compared to Cunningham, the latter's off-court charisma and star power have endeared her to the Fever fan base to an impressive degree, especially because
this situation is way more complicated than it looks. Should the Indiana Fever protect Sophie Cunningham in the expansion draft, even if it means losing another valuable player? Drop your honest opinion below. So Sophie Cunningham posted a throwback video on Instagram of her and Caitlin Clark having a moment on the court during last season. Just a simple clip of 2 teammates who clearly had good chemistry. And Caitlin Clark responded with 3 words that sent Fever fans into a frenzy. Time to run it back. That's it. 3 words. But in the context of where the WNBA is right now, with free agency frozen, CBA negotiations dragging on forever, and expansion drafts looming, those 3 words carry a lot more weight than casual social media banter. Sophie's reply was even more interesting. She said, "Only if you cuddle and make me dinner twice a week." Obviously joking around. Obviously playful teammate stuff. But what matters here is that this public exchange signals something important.
Let me remind you, she was also the only player in the entire league that we sat back and witnessed literally physically defend Caitlin Clark on the court. Just keeping it real. Watched a lot of other teammates just stand around while Sophie trying to scrap. And for some of us,
Caitlin Clark wants Sophie Cunningham back on the Fever, and Sophie wants to be there. Before we get into what this actually means for Indiana's roster construction, we need to address the absolute circus that happened in the comments under that post. Someone genuinely asked, "Has Caitlin Clark ever cheated on her boyfriend Connor?" In response to 2 teammates joking around on social media. This is the exhausting reality of covering this league. You can't have 2 players engage in normal, playful banter without a segment of the fan base trying to manufacture some scandalous narrative that has nothing to do with basketball. Caitlin Clark is in a committed relationship with Connor McCaffrey. Sophie Cunningham is heterosexual. They're friends and former teammates joking around on Instagram. That's literally it. Can we please move on to actual basketball now? Here's what actually matters about this situation.
Indiana doesn't necessarily have to choose when it comes to getting Cunningham or Mitchell. Both players have expressed interest in returning. The Fever's front office will have enough money and flexibility to re-sign them, both if they so desire.
Sophie Cunningham was the 2nd most searched female athlete in America in 2024 according to Google's year-end data. Not 2nd in the WNBA. 2nd among all female athletes in the entire country. She's got a podcast on the Volume Network with Colin Cowherd. She shows up on major media platforms regularly. She's built a genuine fan base that extends way beyond basketball, and for some of us. And here's the critical part. She was only on the Fever for 1 season. Think about that for a second. 1 year in Indiana, and she became the 2nd most searched female athlete in America. That's not just about her personality or her podcast. That's about the platform that playing alongside Caitlin Clark provides. But now the Fever are facing a complicated decision because of expansion draft rules. Portland and Toronto are entering the league, and Indiana has to protect their core players from being selected. The standard protection number in most expansion drafts is 5 or 6 players total. That's it. Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hull, and Nalissa Smith are locks to be protected. That's 4 spots, which means the Fever are looking at maybe 1 or 2 protection slots for everyone else. And that's where this gets messy, because both Kelsey Mitchell and Sophie Cunningham are unrestricted free agents who've publicly stated they want to return to Indiana. The good news is, Indiana doesn't necessarily have to choose between getting Cunningham or Mitchell back. Both players have expressed interest in returning, and the Fever front office should have enough money and flexibility to resign them both if they want to. But here's the problem. If they resign both before the expansion draft, they have to protect both of them, which eats up 2 of their limited protection slots. So let's game out what happens if they leave Sophie unprotected because they can't or won't use a protection slot on her. Portland and Toronto are building franchises from scratch. They need players who can sell tickets and generate media attention immediately. Sophie Cunningham checks both boxes. She's a competent rotation player who brings legitimate star power and marketing value. If she's available in that expansion draft, she's getting selected. Guaranteed. Probably first round, possibly first overall. Because new franchises need recognizable names. They need players who can go on local radio shows and podcasts and actually draw an audience. They need someone who can generate immediate fan interest and media coverage. Portland and Toronto are entering a league where Caitlin Clark just drove record attendance and television ratings. They're looking at a landscape where star power and media presence matter more than they ever have in WNBA history. Sophie Cunningham represents exactly the type of asset expansion teams covet. But there's another factor that doesn't show up in marketing reports or Google search data. Watch the tape from last season. When Caitlin Clark got hit, when she got knocked down, when opponents were taking cheap shots at the league's biggest star, who was the only Fever player consistently stepping up physically? Sophie Cunningham. She was the only teammate who would actually get in someone's face and defend Clark on the court. Not just talk about it in post-game interviews, but actually do it in the moment when it mattered. That element of team culture and locker room chemistry doesn't show up on a stat sheet, but it absolutely matters. The Fever had players with better statistics than Cunningham last season, but they didn't have anyone else who brought that specific willingness to physically defend their star player when things got rough. And in a league where Caitlin Clark is going to continue getting targeted by opponents, having someone who's actually willing to step up and protect her is valuable. Now let's talk about Kelsey Mitchell, because she's obviously part of this equation too. Mitchell averaged 17 points per game last season and has been the team's most consistent scorer for years. She's the clear priority from a pure basketball standpoint. But if Indiana can only protect one of their unrestricted free agents in the expansion draft, the basketball decision and the business decision might point in different directions. Mitchell is the better player, no question. But Cunningham might be the bigger loss if she ends up in Portland or Toronto, because she brings elements that are harder to replace in free agency or the draft. She brings media presence, fan engagement, defensive toughness, and chemistry with the franchise player. And that brings us back to that Instagram exchange. It wasn't just friendly banter. It was a public signal. Caitlin Clark wants Sophie back. She made that clear for everyone to see. And when your generational talent is telling you she wants a specific teammate back, you listen. Not just because it keeps your star happy, but because she's identifying something about team chemistry and fit that might not be obvious from the outside. Look at Sophie's actual impact beyond the box score last season. The Fever went from a dysfunctional lottery team to a playoff squad. Part of that was Clark's arrival. Part of it was Aaliyah Boston's development. But part of it was also adding veterans like Cunningham, who understood how to play alongside a ball-dominant guard and didn't need to be the center of attention. She took charges. She hit open threes. She defended physically. She brought energy off the bench. Those are exactly the qualities you want around a young star who's going to have the ball in her hands most of the time. Sophie didn't need plays called for her. She didn't complain about her role. She just did the dirty work that winning teams need. The timeline matters here, too. Free agency can't start until the CBA is finalized, and CBA negotiations are completely stalled over revenue sharing and salary cap structure. Nobody knows when that gets resolved. Could be next week. Could be next month. But whenever it does happen, there's going to be a compressed free agency period followed immediately by expansion draft preparation. The Fever don't have the luxury of waiting to see how the market develops. They need to make decisions quickly about who they're prioritizing and who they're willing to risk losing. That's why this Instagram exchange matters more than it might seem. It's forcing the conversation into the public sphere, where the front office has to acknowledge what their franchise player wants. Here's another angle that doesn't get discussed enough. What happens if Sophie goes to Portland or Toronto and becomes a legitimate star in her own right? She's 28 years old, entering her prime, with a proven ability to generate media attention and fan engagement. Put her in a featured role on an expansion team that's building an identity from scratch, and she could absolutely break out. Maybe not as a first-team All-WNBA player, but as a fan favorite who sells jerseys and drives ticket sales in a new market. That's incredibly valuable for an expansion franchise. And if the Fever let her walk for nothing, or lose her in the expansion draft because they didn't protect her, that's a missed opportunity that could haunt them for years. The counter-argument is pretty straightforward, though. The Fever can't build their roster around sentiment and social media engagement. They need to prioritize winning basketball games. Kelsey Mitchell is objectively a better scorer. Lexi Hull showed real development last season. Nalissa Smith is a former number 2 overall pick. If protecting Sophie means leaving one of those players exposed to the expansion draft, maybe that's not the right basketball move. But here's the thing about modern professional sports. The line between basketball value and entertainment value is blurrier than it's ever been. The WNBA just negotiated a television deal worth $200 million per year, up from $50 million. That massive increase wasn't driven by competitive balance or playoff drama. It was driven by Caitlin Clark generating record ratings and unprecedented mainstream attention. The league is finally getting paid based on its entertainment value, not just its basketball quality. In that environment, a player like Sophie Cunningham, who brings genuine media presence and fan engagement, has more value than traditional basketball metrics would suggest. She might not be an all-star, but she's someone casual fans actually recognize and want to watch. So where does this leave the Fever? They're facing a decision that every front office hates, choosing between good options with no clear right answer. They could resign both Mitchell and Cunningham, protect them both, and risk losing someone else valuable in the expansion draft. They could prioritize Mitchell, let Sophie test free agency, and hope she either resigns or doesn't get picked up by the expansion teams. Or they could make the aggressive move and lock up Sophie specifically because of her off-court value and her chemistry with Clark, even if that means making a difficult decision elsewhere on the roster. What we know for certain is this: Caitlin Clark wants Sophie Cunningham back. The fan base wants Sophie back. Sophie wants to be back. The question is whether the front office values what she brings enough to make it happen. And if they don't, if they let her walk or leave her unprotected and she ends up becoming a fan favorite in Portland or Toronto, they better be right about whoever they chose instead. Because that's a public relations nightmare that lasts for years, especially when your franchise player publicly asked for that teammate to return. So Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark want to run it back, but the Fever front office has to figure out how to make that happen without losing other valuable pieces in the expansion draft. This decision is going to define Indiana's offseason. If you want more WNBA roster breakdowns and free agency analysis, Smash that like button and subscribe right now.